She woke up to the usual sounds of the city, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional shout from someone rushing down the street, and the clatter of garbage cans being dragged along the alleys. The cold winter morning had seeped through the thin layers of clothing she had managed to keep together. Her blanket, more of a rag than anything else, offered little warmth, but she clutched it close to her, as if holding it tighter could hold the world at bay for a few more minutes. She had been on the streets for longer than she cared to remember. Life had not been kind, and circumstances had pushed her into corners where survival meant hiding in shadows, scavenging for scraps of food, and trying not to be noticed. Yet, despite the hardships, there was something in her, a quiet, steady strength that refused to let despair define her. She moved with a careful rhythm, balancing alertness with caution, knowing that every step in the city streets required a mix of instinct and patience. That morning, she shuffled toward the corner where a small cafe sometimes threw out leftover bread. She had learned early on to be patient, to watch quietly, and to wait for moments of kindness or opportunity. Today luck seemed faint, but a tiny spark of hope pushed her forward. She grabbed the slightly stale bread and found a spot against a wall to eat it in peace. She nibbled slowly, savoring each bite, her mind wandering as it often did, thinking about better days that might never come. Then she heard it, a faint, unusual sound that made her pause. At first she thought it might be construction, common in the city, but the crackling and popping noises grew louder, urgent, and alarming. She squinted down the street and saw smoke curling upward from a nearby apartment building. People were running, their faces pale with fear, their movements chaotic. Shouts filled the air, cries of confusion and panic that made her heart race. Without thinking, she ran toward the chaos. Something inside her compelled her to move, to act. Even though she had no authority, no training, and no reason to put herself in danger, she just knew that someone needed help. The closer she got, the more she could see flames licking the windows, orange and threatening, devouring everything in their path. The smoke was thick, stinging her eyes and lungs, but she refused to stop. Then she heard the child. A small voice, weak and terrified, calling out from somewhere above. She looked up and saw a balcony, smoke curling around the railings and a tiny figure clinging to the edge. The child's eyes met hers for a brief second, filled with fear, and then the little body shook as flames crept closer. Her heart pounded. She knew she had to act quickly. Adrenaline surged through her. She didn't pause to think about her own safety. She found a narrow staircase leading to the building's entrance and sprinted inside, coughing from the thick smoke. Every step was heavy, every breath a struggle, but she pushed forward, driven by a force she could not name. She found a hallway, and with luck it led to the stairs. Her hands were raw from the cold and the rough surfaces, her lungs burning, but she climbed. Floor after floor, the smoke growing denser, the heat more intense, until she reached the floor where the child was trapped. The door was partially blocked by debris, but she shoved it aside and saw the little one. The child's eyes were wide with terror, lips trembling, hands gripping the railing tightly. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if it was really okay. "I've got you. I'll get you out." The child hesitated for a moment, fear holding them in place, but then instinct took over. The woman extended her hand and the child grasped it tightly. She pulled the little one close, feeling the weight of responsibility. Knowing that one wrong step could be disastrous, smoke filled her mouth and nose and her eyes watered. But she forced herself to keep moving. Carefully, they made their way to the stairs, one slow step at a time, until they were finally in the hallway leading outside. When they burst through the building's door, the street seemed like a miracle. Neighbors had gathered, some helping, some just staring in awe. People rushed forward with blankets and coats, wrapping the child safely. Parents and strangers alike cried, hugged, and praised her bravery. But she didn't linger. She only gave a small nod, making sure the child was safe before slipping back into the shadows. The fire trucks arrived shortly after, sirens blaring, hoses spraying water onto the flames. Firefighters shouted orders, and the chaos of the city became a backdrop to the woman, who had already vanished. For her, the world had returned to its usual rhythm, the quiet struggle, the careful steps, the constant search for survival. She didn't wait for thanks. She didn't wait for recognition. All that mattered in that moment was that a small life had been saved, and that alone was enough. Later that night, she found a quiet spot near a park, where the city's hum was softer, almost comforting. She sat down, pulling her blanket closer, her body exhausted but her mind still racing with images of the child's terrified face. She thought about the small gestures of kindness from strangers, the way the community had come together in moments of fear. It was a reminder that even in a world that seemed harsh and unfeeling, moments of connection and courage existed. As she drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, she had no idea that someone had seen her actions. A stranger, wealthy and influential, had watched the news and the social media clips. His heart moved by the courage of a woman who had nothing and yet risked everything for another life. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story, but he knew he had to find her. For the woman, the night passed quietly. She dreamed of a world where she could live without fear, where a small act of bravery didn't go unnoticed. She dreamed of warmth, of kindness returned, of a life where she could stand tall without the weight of hunger and hardship pressing down. But she woke to the same streets, the same cold, the same uncertainty. And yet deep down, a small spark had been ignited, a sense that maybe, just maybe, life had a way of rewarding courage in ways one could never imagine. Morning came again, gray and chilly. With the city stirring to life, she moved carefully through the streets, mindful of every step, every gaze, every potential danger. But the memory of the child, safe and alive, stayed with her like a light she could carry in the darkest corners. It reminded her that even in the harshest realities, one act of bravery could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond her reach. And so she walked on, unnoticed by most, yet a hero in a story that was only just beginning. Little did she know, her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The world that had seemed indifferent was starting to take notice, and a path was opening before her. A path that could lead from the shadows of the streets into a future filled with hope, recognition, and unexpected kindness. The city woke slowly the day after the fire. The streets were littered with debris, and the smell of smoke still lingered in the air. People whispered among themselves, pointing toward the burnt building, still marked by blackened walls and shattered windows. Everyone had heard the story of the child rescued from the flames. It spread like wildfire through social media, news outlets, and neighborhood conversations. The child had been saved, and the hero was a homeless woman nobody knew the name of. In a sleek office high above the city, a man watched the news on a large screen. He was a millionaire, a CEO known for his work and his philanthropy, yet most people never saw this side of him. He didn't care about fame or recognition. What mattered to him were real stories, real acts of courage. When he saw the footage of the woman holding the child through smoke and fire, his heart stirred. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no thought for herself, only concern for the little one. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen long after the segment had ended. Something about her bravery felt profound. He had seen courageous people before, but this woman had no title, no protection, and no wealth. And yet she had risked everything for someone else. He couldn't stop thinking about her. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but he knew he had to find her. Outside, the city moved on. People returned to their daily lives, the fire becoming another story in the endless rhythm of urban chaos. But for the woman, life was the same as it had always been. Cold nights, uncertain meals, the struggle to find a safe place to sleep. She didn't watch the news, didn't read the headlines. She simply moved through the streets, blending in with shadows, unnoticed except by those who looked closely. The man began making calls. He reached out to contacts he trusted, friends in local charities, workers at shelters, and even security personnel who patrolled the city streets. He described her as best he could. A woman, homeless, courageous, the one who had saved a child from a fire. They all paused, some skeptical, some intrigued, but his persistence was unwavering. He wanted to find her, not to reward her immediately, but to understand her, to know her story, to make sure she was safe. For days, he followed leads. He visited shelters and soup kitchens, asking questions quietly, respectfully. He didn't want to alarm anyone, didn't want the woman to feel cornered or uncomfortable. All he had was a single video clip and the accounts of neighbors who had seen the fire. Yet his determination never wavered. He felt a strange connection, as though her courage had called out to him, reaching across the city, breaking the distance between their worlds. Meanwhile, she continued her routine. She found food where she could, sometimes receiving leftover meals from kind shopkeepers or handouts from passers-by. She slept under bridges or in alleys, wrapped in old blankets, always listening to the city's sounds, always wary. She had no idea that someone was searching for her, that a person with influence and resources was piecing together clues just to find her. She didn't expect recognition or reward. For her, saving the child was simply the right thing to do, something her heart had demanded of her without thought or hesitation. One evening, as the sky turned orange and the streets grew quiet, the man walked the alleys near the park where she often spent the night. He had no certainty that she would be there, but he trusted his instincts. He moved slowly, observing the shadows, watching for the figure he had seen on the news. Then finally he saw her. She was crouched by a trash can, carefully dividing a small portion of bread she had found. Her hands were rough, her hair unkempt and her clothes thin and worn, yet there was a quiet dignity in the way she moved. He approached slowly, not wanting to scare her. "Excuse me," he said gently. She looked up, startled, her eyes wary, scanning him for danger, her body tensed, instinctively ready to flee. But he raised his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "I saw what you did. With the child," he continued. His voice was calm, kind. "I wanted to find you, to say thank you. Properly." For a long moment she said nothing. Suspicion clouded her gaze. People with money often had agendas, and she had learned not to trust easily. "I don't need your thanks," she finally said. Her voice was soft but firm. "I did what anyone would do." He nodded, understanding. "I know," he said. "But what you did, it's extraordinary. I don't want anything from you, not money, not recognition. I just want to help. If you let me." She studied him carefully. There was no condescension in his tone, no hint of judgment. He wasn't pitying her. That was something she hadn't experienced in years. A person speaking to her as if she mattered simply because she had lived, because she had acted with courage. I don't know," she whispered. Fear and doubt tugged at her. Life had taught her that offers of help often came with strings attached. But something about him felt different. She could see honesty in his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a small flicker of trust. "I won't force you," he said gently. "I just want you to be safe. You risked your life to save someone else. Let me make sure you're okay, even for a little while." She hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Just for a little while," she said. That was all she could allow herself. A small window, nothing more. She couldn't imagine letting someone into her life completely, not after all she had been through. He smiled softly, and together they walked to a nearby shelter he had arranged for her. It was modest but warm, a place where she could rest, eat properly, and recover from exhaustion. She moved cautiously, observing every detail, every corner, still unsure if this was real. But as the night wore on, she began to relax slightly. For the first time in years, she slept without constantly listening for danger, without worrying about being forced to flee in the middle of the night. The next morning, she awoke to breakfast freshly prepared and hot. The smells alone were almost overwhelming, something she had not experienced in a long time. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, and began to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Comfort. The man didn't press her. He simply sat nearby, reading papers, occasionally offering a kind word or a question about her well-being. She began to realize that this wasn't about control or charity. He wanted to know her as a person, not as a project or a story. He asked about her dreams, her memories, and even her fears. Slowly, the walls she had built around herself began to soften. Over the following days, she started to feel a shift. It was subtle at first. A little more warmth in her steps, a little less tension in her shoulders. She began to think about possibilities she had pushed aside long ago. Maybe she could have a life that wasn't just about survival. Maybe she could be more than what the streets had forced her to become. Meanwhile, the man continued his quiet search for understanding. He asked about her family, about how she had ended up on the streets, and listened without judgment. He didn't rush her, didn't demand answers she wasn't ready to give. He simply offered patience, respect, and safety, a combination she had almost forgotten existed. Though cautious, she began to open up in small ways. She shared memories of her childhood, stories of hope that had once been bright before life had dimmed them. She spoke of moments of kindness she had received on the streets, and the rare friends she had made among strangers who understood hardship. With every story, every word, she felt lighter, as if telling her truth could slowly lift the weight of years spent in fear and struggle. Outside, the city continued on, unaware that the woman it had briefly cheered for on the news was beginning to find her own sense of hope. She didn't yet know what the future held, didn't yet understand the full scope of the changes coming her way. But in these quiet moments, sharing stories and laughter with someone who saw her humanity, she began to believe that life could be different, that courage, even in the poorest and most desperate lives, could be noticed and honored. The man, for his part, felt a growing respect and admiration for her. He had expected to find a hero, but he found someone more human, more resilient, more inspiring than he could have imagined. She had faced unimaginable hardships, yet her spirit remained unbroken. He realized that finding her wasn't about giving her a handout. It was about witnessing her strength, standing beside her as she rediscovered hope, and ensuring the world recognized what true courage looked like. And so, the days passed. She began to rest, to eat, to regain small pieces of herself lost to the streets. Each day, trust grew, even if only a little. Each day, she felt the possibility of change, of a life beyond survival, of being valued for who she truly was. And somewhere deep inside, a seed of hope had been planted, one that, if nurtured, could grow into something she never thought she would experience again. A life with safety, dignity, and the chance to truly be seen. Days passed in a quiet rhythm, each one bringing small changes that the woman began to notice. The warmth of the shelter was a new experience for her. She had long been used to cold nights, thin blankets, and the constant ache of hunger. Now she could sleep without fear of the biting cold and wake up to a breakfast that was more than scraps. Yet despite the comfort, she remained cautious. Trust did not come easily. Life on the streets had taught her that kindness often hid something else, and she had learned to protect herself by keeping people at a distance. The man visited regularly, but he did not impose. He never pressured her to answer questions she wasn't ready to answer, nor did he demand her time or attention. He treated her with patience, always calm, always respectful. He asked simple things at first: how she slept, whether she had eaten enough, if the shelter was comfortable. Gradually, he began to ask about her life, her childhood, and her experiences on the streets. Each question was careful, never judgmental, and he always listened without interrupting or offering unsolicited advice. At first, she responded with short answers, keeping her thoughts close. But over time, she began to feel that she could speak without fear. She told him about the days when she had no one to turn to, the nights when the cold was unbearable, and the small moments of hope she had clung to along the way. She spoke about the people who had helped her, even briefly, and the rare moments of kindness she had witnessed in the world. Each story she shared was a piece of herself she had kept hidden for so long, and each time she spoke, she felt a little lighter. The man, in turn, shared stories of his life, not in a way that boasted of wealth or success, but to show her that everyone had struggles, even if they looked different. He spoke of mistakes, of moments when he had felt powerless, and the lessons he had learned from them. His honesty was disarming. She realized that he did not see her as someone beneath him, nor as someone to fix. He saw her as a person, equal and worthy of respect. For the first time, she felt a connection that was not tied to pity or judgment. One afternoon, he suggested a walk in the nearby park. The woman hesitated, unsure about leaving the shelter, but eventually agreed. The air was crisp, and the sunlight filtering through the trees made everything feel calmer. She had spent so much of her life in shadows that being in the open, even for a short time, felt strange. Yet she found herself relaxing as they walked. The man did not rush her or push her to talk. He simply walked beside her, allowing her to set the pace. As they walked, he asked about the child she had rescued. She described the little one's fear, the way the child clung to her hand, and the relief she felt when the child was finally safe. Her voice trembled at times, not from fear, but from the memory of that moment. The intensity, the urgency, the life-or-death stakes that had demanded all her courage. He listened silently, letting her speak, nodding gently, never interrupting, never offering false praise. The simplicity of his attention was profound. She realized that someone was truly listening, truly valuing her experience. Over the next few weeks, a quiet routine formed. She began to help in small ways around the shelter, organizing donations, preparing simple meals, and even reading to children who had come with their parents. Each act, however small, gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The man encouraged her, not by telling her what to do, but by showing that he trusted her abilities. He asked for her opinion, listened to her suggestions, and allowed her to take small responsibilities. With each task, she regained confidence in herself, a confidence that had been worn down by years of hardship. Yet despite the growing trust, there were moments when doubt crept in. She would sometimes retreat into silence, wary of attachments, worried that something would be taken away if she let herself care too much. She had survived so long by expecting little from the world, and the sudden presence of someone who cared deeply was both comforting and frightening. The man noticed these moments, but he never pushed. Instead, he waited patiently, allowing her to return to openness in her own time. One evening, as they sat in the shelter's common room, the woman shared a memory from her childhood. She spoke of a small garden near her first home, where flowers bloomed in colors she had not seen since. She remembered the smell of the soil, the warmth of the sun on her face, and the sense of wonder that had once filled her life. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but the man leaned closer, encouraging her to continue. Sharing that memory was difficult, but as she spoke, she felt a sense of release, as if the memory had been locked away and was finally allowed to breathe. He asked gently, "Do you ever think about going back to a life like that?" She paused, considering. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent so long surviving, I'm not sure I know what life is beyond that, but sometimes I wonder if it's possible." "That possibility exists," he said simply. "You've already shown what you are capable of. Courage, compassion. You have a strength most people never find in their lives. Maybe this is the chance to see how far it can take you." His words were not commanding. They were invitations. She realized that no one had ever spoken to her like that before. Not demanding, not judging, but offering a path forward. And for the first time, she began to imagine a life beyond survival. She imagined safety, warmth, and trust. She imagined using her courage to help others, just as she had helped the child. The idea was frightening, but it also felt like hope, the kind she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. One afternoon, the man brought a small notebook and a set of pencils. "I thought you might like to write," he said. She looked at him, puzzled. Writing had been a forgotten pleasure, something she had abandoned long ago when survival became her only focus. But the notebook sat in her hands like a gift, a simple tool for expression. She hesitated, then began to write. At first it was just thoughts, memories, and observations. Gradually she began to document her experiences, her dreams, and her reflections. The act of writing gave her a new way to process her emotions, to find clarity, and to see herself as more than just someone struggling to survive. Through these small acts, walking in the park, sharing memories, writing, trust grew. She began to see the man not as a stranger but as a friend, someone who genuinely cared without expecting anything in return. She laughed more often, smiled without hesitation, and allowed herself moments of joy that had been rare in her life. Each day, the weight she had carried for years seemed a little lighter. The man, for his part, never wavered in his respect. He celebrated her victories, no matter how small, and treated her struggles with understanding. He recognized the courage it took for her to rebuild trust, to step into experiences that had once been impossible. He did not see her as someone to rescue, but as someone whose strength and humanity deserved acknowledgement and support. One afternoon, while they sat near the window of the shelter, watching children play in the courtyard, the woman spoke quietly. "I never thought I would feel normal again," she said. "Safe, I mean. It's strange, but good." The man nodded, understanding that normalcy for her was a profound gift, a testament to how much she had endured. "You've earned this," he said softly. "You've survived, and you've chosen courage over fear. That is something no one can take from you." As the days turned into weeks, she began to accept that life could be different. She started dreaming, not grandiose dreams, but small ones, having a stable place to sleep, cooking a meal without fear, walking in the park whenever she wanted. She began to believe that she could contribute, help others, and be valued for who she truly was. The bond between them deepened, built on respect, trust, and quiet understanding. She still had moments of doubt, moments when her old fears threatened to take over, but she knew now that she was not alone. There was someone who saw her humanity, someone who believed in her even when she struggled to believe in herself. And in that growing connection, something remarkable began to happen. She realized that her courage, which had once been used only to survive, could now be used to live, to create, and to inspire. For the first time in years, she felt that her life had direction. that her actions mattered, and that the world, despite its hardships, could hold kindness and opportunity. The journey was far from over. She still faced challenges, doubts, and fears. But with each day, with each conversation, and with each step forward, she began to see the possibility of a future she had never allowed herself to imagine. And it was in these quiet, ordinary moments, the shared walks, the gentle conversations, the small acts of trust, that the foundation of her new life was being built, strong and steady, ready to carry her toward the chapters yet to come. Weeks turned into months, and the woman began to notice changes in herself that she hadn't thought possible. The shelter had become more than just a place to sleep. It was a safe space where she could breathe without fear. The man continued to visit, always respectful, never rushing her, but encouraging small steps forward. Each day she discovered a little more about what it meant to live rather than just survive. She started to take care of herself in ways she had long abandoned. Mornings were no longer just a matter of waking to face hunger and cold. They became a routine of washing, dressing, and preparing a simple breakfast. She felt a strange sense of pride in these little acts. They were reminders that she was reclaiming a life that had been denied to her for so long. The simple joy of warmth, cleanliness, and nourishment felt almost foreign yet exhilarating. The man encouraged her to explore new opportunities. "You've shown courage beyond measure," he said one afternoon as they walked along a quiet street. "That courage can do more than just survive. It can inspire, teach, and help others. You have a gift, and it deserves to grow." She hesitated at first, unsure if she could step into the world in any meaningful way. But the thought stirred something inside her, a small spark she had not felt in years. He suggested she volunteer at a local community center that helped women and children who were struggling. It was a gentle suggestion, not a demand, but she felt drawn to it. Her first day was difficult. She felt out of place among people who had their lives somewhat together, people who spoke with confidence she hadn't yet regained. Yet when she saw the faces of the women and children, she felt a connection. Their struggles mirrored her own in ways she could not ignore. She found herself listening, offering advice when asked, and sharing small stories of courage. Each smile she received in return strengthened her resolve. The child she had rescued occasionally visited the shelter. Seeing the little one safe and happy was a balm for her spirit. She realized that her actions had consequences far beyond the moment of the fire, and that understanding gave her a renewed sense of purpose. The child's family had tried to repay her kindness, but she refused gifts, insisting that she had only done what anyone would do. Still, she cherished the visits, the laughter, and the warmth of being appreciated for something she had risked her life to do. She began to develop routines that nurtured both body and mind. Writing in her notebook remained a daily practice. Sometimes she wrote stories of her past. Other times she wrote dreams for the future, dreams that seemed strange yet exciting. She painted small pictures as well, sketches of the city, the shelter, and moments of courage she witnessed every day. These activities, small as they were, helped her heal. They reminded her that she was more than her past, more than her hardships, and capable of creating a life of meaning. The man observed her progress with quiet admiration. He never tried to control her, never pushed her to move faster than she was ready. Instead, he celebrated small victories. The first time she confidently spoke at the community center, the first time she smiled without hesitation, the first time she accepted help without fear. Each moment was a reminder that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, and that courage could lead to transformation. She began to think about the future in ways she never had before. Once the future had been a vague horizon of uncertainty, filled with fears of hunger and danger. Now she considered possibilities. Perhaps she could continue her education, or even help create programs for other women and children who had suffered as she had. She imagined herself as a mentor, someone who could provide guidance, safety, and hope. The thought was both exciting and intimidating, but she felt ready to explore it. One day, while working at the community center, she encountered a woman struggling to adjust to life after years on the streets. The woman was defensive, suspicious, and exhausted. The woman's story reminded her of herself not long ago, and she felt a surge of empathy. Instead of lecturing or offering empty advice, she simply listened. She offered small suggestions, encouragement, and above all, respect. Slowly, the woman began to open up, and the connection that formed reminded her that she could make a real difference in other people's lives. Word of her courage and dedication began to spread quietly. People at the community center respected her for her resilience and honesty. She didn't flaunt her past. She didn't seek attention. Instead, her actions spoke for themselves. Her presence became a source of inspiration for those struggling, a living example that life could change if one held on to courage and hope. Despite these changes, she still faced inner struggles. Memories of her life on the streets haunted her at times. She sometimes questioned whether she truly belonged in this new life, whether she deserved comfort or whether she could sustain the trust she had built. On those nights, the man would sit with her quietly, offering companionship without pressure. He didn't solve her doubts, but his calm presence reminded her that she was not alone, and that healing was a process, not a destination. Her relationship with the man also evolved. What had started as cautious interactions grew into genuine friendship. They shared quiet moments, laughter, and deep conversations. He became someone she could rely on, someone whose presence was steady and comforting. She had feared attachments for so long, but now she realized that trusting someone did not make her weak. It made her stronger. It allowed her to rebuild a life that had been fragmented for years. Through her volunteer work, she began to see the tangible results of her actions. Children smiled because she took the time to listen. Women found strength in her example. Small victories like helping someone find housing or encouraging a young woman to continue her education gave her a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. Each act reminded her that courage and kindness were contagious, capable of creating ripples far beyond the immediate moment. She began to think about creating something of her own, a place or program where women and children could feel safe, supported, and valued. The idea had been a distant dream before, but now it felt possible. She shared her thoughts with the man, who listened carefully, offering advice when asked but never directing her. His support gave her the confidence to explore her vision, to consider that her experiences could help shape a better future for others. One afternoon, she walked through the park where she had first begun to trust again. Children played nearby, laughter filling the air. She watched them, thinking about the child she had saved and the countless small acts of courage she had witnessed since then. She realized that her life was no longer defined by fear and survival alone. It was defined by hope, purpose, and the potential to inspire others. The contrast between her past and present was stark, yet it reminded her of the power of perseverance, trust, and courage. Her days became a balance of work, reflection, and quiet moments of joy. She began to notice her own growth, not just in confidence or skills, but in self-worth. She understood that she had value simply for being herself, for having survived, for having chosen courage in the face of danger. The woman she saw in the mirror each day was no longer just a survivor. She was someone capable of leadership, compassion, and meaningful change. Evenings were often quiet. She would sit by a window, notebook in hand, writing about the day, her reflections and the dreams that now seemed achievable. The man sometimes joined her, sharing stories of his own life or simply sitting in companionable silence. They didn't need words to communicate. Their trust and understanding had created a bond that spoke volumes without effort. Months after the fire, she realized how far she had come. From the cold streets to a place of warmth, purpose, and growing confidence, her life had transformed in ways she had not imagined possible. She understood that courage had carried her this far, but kindness, trust, and support had allowed her to rebuild the foundation of her life. And now, with that foundation in place, she was ready to step further, to dream bigger, and to help others do the same. The woman had begun to see the world differently. Once it had been a place of danger, hunger, and despair. Now it was a place of opportunity, hope, and connection. She had discovered that her bravery, once limited to survival, could be used to inspire, uplift, and create change. And though challenges would still come, she was no longer afraid to face them. She had learned that courage, compassion, and trust were powerful forces capable of transforming not only her life but the lives of countless others. Months had passed since the woman had first stepped into the shelter, guided by the man who had seen her courage. In that time, her life had changed in ways she had never imagined. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own value. The streets that had once defined her existence were now a memory, a reminder of where she had come from, not where she was going. She had established a routine that balanced work, reflection, and service. At the community center, She became a pillar of support for women and children who were struggling. Her presence was a source of inspiration. Her story of saving a child from a fire and rising from hardship gave hope to everyone who met her. People began to seek her out, not just for assistance, but for guidance, encouragement, and the quiet strength she embodied. The woman had also started to dream in ways she hadn't allowed herself to before. The idea of creating a foundation for homeless women and children had grown from a simple thought into a real plan. She wanted a place where people could find safety, support, and education, a place where courage and resilience were celebrated. She shared her vision with the man, who listened intently, asking questions, giving advice only when asked, and supporting her every step. His respect and belief in her had given her the confidence to step forward. Planning the foundation was a challenge, but it was one she embraced. She visited local organizations, spoke with social workers, and learned about resources available to help people in need. She researched programs for education, vocational training, and emotional support. Each step was a learning process, but she approached it with determination. The thought that she could help others avoid the struggles she had endured drove her forward. As the foundation took shape, she realized that her work was about more than just providing shelter or food. It was about restoring dignity, teaching self-worth, and giving people the tools to believe in themselves. She wanted every person who came through the doors to feel seen, respected, and valued, not just as someone in need, but as someone capable of change and growth. She had lived that transformation herself, and she knew the impact it could have on others. The child she had saved continued to visit, often bringing stories of school, friends, and everyday life. Seeing the child happy and thriving reminded her of why she had started this journey. The gratitude in the child's eyes and the smiles of the parents were a constant source of motivation. She had saved one life in the fire, but now she had the opportunity to touch countless others in ways that were just as meaningful, if not more so. The man remained a constant presence, though he had never sought credit for her achievements. He celebrated quietly when she succeeded, stood by her when challenges arose, and encouraged her without overshadowing her. Their friendship had evolved into a partnership based on trust, respect, and shared purpose. He had given her the gift of belief in herself, but she had taken the reins and built something remarkable with it. One sunny afternoon, the foundation held its first official gathering. Women and children who had benefited from the program shared their stories, expressing gratitude for the support and guidance they had received. There were smiles, laughter, and tears, a mix of emotions that painted a picture of hope and transformation. The woman listened quietly, humbled by the impact of her work. She realized that the courage that had once compelled her to save a child from a fire had grown into something much larger, a force capable of inspiring an entire community. During the event, she was formally recognized for her heroism and dedication. The local media covered the story, highlighting her journey from homelessness to a position where she could help others. She spoke to reporters not about her own struggles, but about the importance of courage, kindness, and opportunity. Her words were simple, heartfelt, and sincere, touching everyone who heard them. She wanted people to understand that heroism was not defined by wealth, education, or status. It was defined by actions, compassion, and the willingness to take risks for others. Despite the attention, she remained grounded. Fame and recognition had never been her goal. She focused on the work itself, on helping others, and on building a community where people could rise above their circumstances. She continued to write, to reflect, and to mentor, using her experiences to guide those who were struggling. Her life had become a cycle of giving and learning, a cycle that reinforced the value of courage and compassion. Her past was never forgotten, but it no longer held her captive. She visited the streets occasionally, speaking with women who had yet to find safety or stability. She shared her story not as someone who had escaped hardship, but as someone who understood it, someone who could offer practical advice and hope. Each visit reminded her that her life had meaning beyond her own survival, that her courage could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she had never imagined when she first rescued the child from the fire. The man, watching from nearby, felt a deep sense of pride, not in himself, but in the woman he had come to admire. She had taken a single act of courage and transformed it into a life of purpose. He had offered support, but it was her strength resilience, and vision that had built this new reality. He had seen countless successes in business and philanthropy, but witnessing someone rise from adversity and create change in the lives of others had a power that no amount of wealth or status could match. As the evening of the event drew to a close, she stepped outside to watch the sunset over the city. The orange glow reflected on the buildings, painting them with warmth and light. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, and realized how far she had come, from the cold streets and dangerous alleys to a place of safety, purpose, and growing influence. Her life had been transformed. Yet she felt no pride in herself for surviving alone. Her pride came from what she could now give to others. Looking back, she remembered the fear, the uncertainty, and the countless nights spent wondering if she would ever be safe again. Each memory was a reminder of her strength, the courage that had carried her through unimaginable hardships, and the power of small acts to change lives. She had learned that heroism was not a single moment, but a series of choices to act, to trust, to believe in oneself and in others. The foundation continued to grow, reaching more women and children each month. She trained volunteers, coordinated programs, and ensured that the focus remained on dignity, empowerment, and real opportunity. Every success story, every smile, every small triumph reinforced the importance of her work. She realized that she was not just helping people survive, she was helping them thrive. Through it all, her life remained a balance of action and reflection. She continued to write, capturing stories of resilience and hope. She shared her journey with the community, not as someone seeking praise, but as someone showing that change was possible. Her story became a beacon, a living testament to courage, compassion, and the human spirit. One afternoon, as she walked through the park where the child she had saved played with friends, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had begun her journey with a single act of courage, saving a child from a fire. That act had led her to a man who believed in her, a foundation that empowered others, and a life filled with purpose. She understood now that heroism was not defined by wealth or status, but by the choices one made, the courage one showed, and the lives one touched. The city, which had once been a place of struggle and fear, now held hope and opportunity for her and for those she helped. Her story inspired people from all walks of life. They saw in her the possibility of transformation, the power of courage, and the importance of kindness. She had become more than a survivor. She had become a guide, a mentor, and a symbol of hope. As night fell and the city lights began to glow, she returned to the shelter, where the man waited. They exchanged a quiet smile, knowing that the journey was far from over, but that the foundation they had built together was strong. It was a life rooted in courage, trust, and compassion, a life that could continue to grow, inspire, and create change for years to come. For the woman, every challenge ahead was now an opportunity. She had learned that the world could be harsh, but it could also be kind. She had discovered that trust could be rebuilt, courage could be nurtured, and lives could be changed in ways one never imagined. And as she closed her eyes that night, she felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that her journey, once defined by survival, had transformed into a life of purpose, hope, and lasting impact. Her story, which began on the cold streets with a single act of bravery, had come full circle. She had saved one life in a moment of danger, and in doing so she had discovered her own ability to transform countless others. Her courage had not only changed her world, but it had also changed the world for everyone she touched. And in that transformation she found the true meaning of heroism, not fame, not wealth, but the power to inspire, uplift, and give hope to those who needed it most.